In this film, we're going to be talking about a somewhat extreme response to the Soviet heavy tanks unveiled at the end of World War II, a vehicle equipped with the biggest tank gun in history.
The FV4005! On September 7th, 1945, 4 Allied nations came together to celebrate the end of World War II at the Berlin Victory Parade. The British, French, United States and Soviet Union all used it as an opportunity to show off some of their newest tanks. But it was the Soviet Union in particular that had both civilians and military personnel stunned.
They used the parade as a perfect stage for the debut of the new IS-3 heavy tank, a true behemoth that was bigger, more armoured and more powerful than any tank the West had to show. With tensions between the East and West rising, this revelation only further fueled the paranoia that the Soviets could become aggressive towards the West.
An iron curtain has descended across the continent.
The Western nations then had to ask themselves, how can our tanks possibly compete?
And more worryingly, if this is what the Soviets had in 1945, what on earth could they have in, say, 10 years' time? A big problem required a big solution, and that is exactly what the British set out to do. And in doing so, they would go on to create and mount the biggest caliber tank gun in history. The revelation of the IS-3 had clearly caused a panic, but it's worth putting into context as to why that was. The IS-3 had been developed in the closing years of World War II, and a prototype had been completed in October 1944 and trialled in December of that year.
It is armed with a D-25 122mm main gun, but even more impressive was its armour. It has a pike nose which not only made the frontal armour even more effective, but meant it was structurally stronger too. This was achieved by only having one member of the crew in the front, meaning less limitations on armour around the driver's compartment. With there being only one crewman in the front of the tank positioned in the centre, it allowed for the armour to be sloped around the driver. With 120mm of sloped frontal armour at 55 degrees, it has almost 200mm of frontal protection. At the sides it has 90mm of armour, and the mantlet, the most heavily armoured section, has up to 240mm.
In contrast, the most advanced British tanks at the time were the Comet and the Centurion. The Comet, essentially an up-gunned and up-armoured version of the Cromwell, and armed with a brilliant 77mm gun, but it's only got 100mm of frontal armour, and that's less than that of the earlier Churchill tanks. The Centurion, an entirely new type of tank which took some of the most important lessons learned from the Second World War and combined them into a single tank. With 80mm of sloped frontal armour and armed with the famous 17-pounder, it could penetrate over 180mm of armour at 2 kilometres. But it was thought that even these tanks wouldn't be enough to take out what would eventually supersede the IS-3. The British needed something big and powerful enough to take out such heavily armoured tanks, and they needed it sooner rather than later. In August 1950, the War Office created a requirement for a weapon capable of defeating 152mm of armour, sloped at 60 degrees at a range of 2,000 yards or 1,830 metres, with the aim of taking out potential threats like the IS-3. The issue is that there was no such tank gun within the British arsenal, so a new one would have to be created. It was confirmed that the only weapon capable of achieving such a requirement would be a 180mm gun firing the British favourite Hesh, high explosive squash head. It was then confirmed when a trial was carried out that this combination of gun and projectile would be more than enough to meet the requirement. The gun at this stage of development was referred to as a 180mm caliber. Its actual caliber was 183, and eventually in December of 1952, its designation would be changed to reflect this. The final product was the L4A1 tank gun. Being a 183mm tank gun, it was massive, being both long and heavy. The length of the barrel was 7.3 meters, and the entire gun weighed 2.8 tons. The muzzle velocity was 2,500 feet per second, although later this would be revised to 2,350. The next question was what vehicle would mount this new gun, and 4 options were presented. The first one was for the gun to be mounted and function like a traditional tank in a 360-degree traversable turret in a fully armoured vehicle. The second option was a self-propelled mounting with limited traverse but with heavy frontal armour. The third option was to be either limited or fully traversable with very light armour, and the fourth and final option was to be a self-propelled mounting with no armour whatsoever. They ultimately decided on option 2, and work started in January of 1951. This vehicle would be based on FV4005, or what would eventually become known as Conqueror. But instead of the 120mm, it would mount a 180mm gun instead, and this vehicle was given the designation FV4015. An FV4014 chassis would be heavily modified to mount the turret towards the back and house the engine in the centre between the fighting compartment and the driver. Due to the sheer size of the gun and power of the recoil, the traverse would be limited to 45 degrees either side, and only 20 rounds of ammunition could be carried on board. This new vehicle was unlike anything the British had designed previously, and was planned to enter production in mid-1953. However, FV4014, or Conqueror, was still in development, and it was not seen as viable to design a new vehicle based on a chassis which wasn't ready yet. As a stopgap, the gun would be trialled on a different chassis altogether, so that when FV4014 was ready, it could quickly be transferred over. Doing these tests earlier rather than later provided an opportunity to hopefully iron out any potential issues before the gun was eventually mounted in FV4015. The alternative design would be based on the Centurion Mark III chassis, something already in service, thoroughly tested and readily available.
This interim arrangement would receive the designation FV4005. There were many unknowns as to what would happen by mounting such a huge caliber of gun on a tank, and FV4005 would hopefully highlight any potential issues.
FV4005, initially known as Heavy Anti-Tank Self-Propelled 1, would be made in 2 stages and would go against each other during trials.
Stage 1 comprised of the gun on an open mounting with no protection, which could be elevated by 10 degrees and depressed by 5. It was believed that the sheer amount of energy generated by the recoil when firing could cause the vehicle to topple over if the gun was pointing too far over either side. The gun was fitted with a concentric recoil system, a cylinder around the lower part of the barrel. This version also featured a loader assist, a massive revolver-type cylinder that held 5 rounds of ammunition. This was designed to make it easier for the loader to load these projectiles, which were extremely heavy. There are several reports mentioning the weight of the projectiles used, and they range from 65.8 kilos to 72.3, roughly the weight of a washing machine. The ammunition was 2-piece, so after the projectile was loaded, a brass case full of propellant followed it. This weighed another 31 kilos. Together, the entire round was almost 1.5 meters tall. Stage 2 looked more like your traditional tank. It used the same 180mm gun, but was fitted with a conventional hydropneumatic recuperator and independent runout control. The crew would be protected by a splinter-proof turret with only 14mm of protection all around. Heavier armour was ruled out as to keep the weight of the vehicle below 50 tons, and the traverse would be limited to a narrow firing arc. Due to the enclosed space within the turret, the loader assist was removed, and instead 2 loaders would be responsible for loading the heavy ammunition. The fire rate was around 2 rounds per minute, with 12 rounds carried on board. By April 1952, Stage 1 had been completed. It was decided that a ground anchor would be mounted on both Stage 1 and Stage 2 vehicles to help dampen the movement during firing. Specially designed sights were also meant to be made for the testing of these vehicles, but they never materialised. And in the end, a TZF-12A sight, originally fitted to the German Panther, was used instead.
By June 1953, the first firing trials had been carried out on Stage 1, but Stage 2 still wasn't ready, and it would take several more months until the work was complete.
During the Stage 1 trials, observers paid close attention to how the main gun affected the rest of the vehicle with and without the ground anchor. For example, in the official report of these tests, it was noted that when fired without the anchor, the front of the vehicle lifted 17 inches and the back dropped by 10 inches, double that of when the anchor was deployed. The tank also moved 9 inches backwards.
Similarly, with the turret traverse to 90 degrees, the effects on the vehicle were the most extreme. The report noting that firing the gun at 90 degrees traverse imparts an extremely high amplitude movement with fast cyclic rate to whole hull. This shifted the whole 50-ton tank 2 inches sideways. At some point during the trial, it became apparent that the gun elevation gear had completely failed, likely due to the blast of the main gun during the trial. The internal components had been bent and the mounting bolts had completely sheared. The report notes that it was strongly recommended that no crew member be permitted to occupy any turret position during firing until a full instrumented firing trial had been completed. Put bluntly, firing the main gun caused the rest of the vehicle to literally shake itself apart.
By July 1955, the Stage 2 prototypes had been extensively trialled, one vehicle having fired 150 rounds. For the next year, these trials continued, all aimed at aiding the development of FV4005. By this stage, a huge amount of work had gone into developing the 183mm L4 gun, and extensive trials taught valuable lessons for how it would be implemented in FV4015.
This video has been made possible by our supporters on Patreon, our YouTube members, and our super thanks donors. Please join them if you can, and support the Tank Museum. And thanks for watching.
And here we have the fully restored Stage 2 vehicle as it would have appeared during trials. It's pretty much on a bog standard Mark III Centurion chassis, except for the enormous gun crutch at the front and this ground anchor on the back. Of course though, this vehicle is all about mounting that 180mm gun, so let's go have a look in the turret. Right, so we're here inside the turret of FV4005, and just being here, you can really get a sense of how much room there is inside here. Obviously, you'd have your 4 members of the crew, you'd have your gunner, your commander, and your 2 loaders, and that's presumably why you've got so much space here, because they need to have that room to pick up the very heavy ammunition and load it into the gun. And speaking of which, that breech there is absolutely colossal, and you really can get an idea of just why you'd need 2 men to actually load this thing. And just remember the sheer power of that 183mm gun. It's in a very, very thin turret, only 14mm, and you can hear just how relatively flimsy it is in here. So when that gun fires, it's not a surprise that this thing literally shook the rest of the vehicle apart. Now, obviously this vehicle is huge, but it's also very tall as well. In a normal Centurion, most of your crew in the fighting compartment are actually a bit further down there. But with this, we're so much higher up. And as a result, if you look down where the rest of the crew would be, there is just nothing there. And the turret itself, it's just so strange compared to your conventional turret. I mean, you've got the radiators that you can see right down there, which you would not have in a normal Centurion. You've got a full-size door on the back just to get in and out of this shed. It's definitely something else. Unfortunately though, despite all the effort spent on FV215 and FV4005, the project was eventually cancelled in 1957, leading to the dismantling and dismounting of both Stage 1 and Stage 2 vehicles. So, why did the FV215 and by extension FV4005 projects come to an end? Well, at the same time that trials were being conducted, the British, along with many other countries around the world, were exploring and developing new ways of taking out heavy armour at a fraction of the cost. ATGMs, anti-tank guided missiles.
These missiles were not only extremely cheap in comparison, but could be mounted to a wide variety of vehicles, whether it be small wheeled vehicles like the Ferret armoured car, helicopters, or even main battle tanks. Not to mention some missiles could be carried and used on foot.
With all these factors in mind, it's easy to be able to ask yourself, why do you need an expensive weapons development program to make a huge gun when a small missile can do the same job, if not more effective, at a fraction of the cost?
The fact is, missiles can be steered onto their target, whereas the 183mm was not considered accurate enough at its maximum range of 2,000 meters, especially in crosswinds due to the size of the projectile. In 1957, the British military was hit with significant cuts. Many army units were amalgamated, and programs like FV215 were cancelled in favour of exploring cheaper projects, and this ultimately is why the project came to an end. Around this time, the Soviets happened to be moving away from heavy armour in their doctrine, and more towards medium tanks with an emphasis on numbers, although this is hindsight and the British may not have known this at the time.
In addition, smaller, more practical guns, although less powerful than the 183mm, were still more than capable of doing damage to enemy armour. And this was especially the case when advancements in ammunition were made and the armour-piercing fin-stabilised discarding sabot round was introduced. So with all that said and done, what happened to the Stage 2 prototypes?
One of the Stage 2 turrets was offered to the Royal Military College of Science in Shrivenham for use in design exercises. In January 1971, the Tank Museum acquired the Stage 2 turret from Shrivenham and is likely the only remains of the vehicle. It spent decades outside exposed to the elements. Children would often play on it, along with other turrets and vehicles on display outside, before health and safety was much of a thing. In 2007, the turret was mounted on a Centurion Mark 12 chassis and placed at the exit of the Tank Museum as a gate guardian, until last year. In 2023, Joe Hughes, a private collector of military vehicles, expressed interest in reuniting the FV4005 turret to the accurate Mark III Centurion chassis, and for the vehicle to appear at TankFest 2024. We've been closely following the progress of the project and recently visited Joe Hughes' workshop in Leicester to see how he was getting on.
Right, well, we're here in Joe's workshop here in Leicester. Joe, thank you for having us.
No problem at all.
Could you just tell us a little bit about yourself and a little bit what you're doing on this project?
Right, well, I restore military vehicles with a team of mine. Normally we just buy abandoned vehicles and we slowly do them up and whatever. And now somehow we've ended up working with you guys and World of Tanks on this project, which is still pretty insane. But yeah, so this one here, we're primarily just working on the hull. Like I say, the Tank Museum have kindly done most of the work with the turret for us. So we're getting this to be a running, driving, all safe and looking right. So we've had to change tracks, we've put replacement engine in it, replacement gearbox, replacement clutch. So everything it's not brand new, but it's pretty close. We're just trying to get the vehicle to be as good as we can possibly get it. And so it's reliable, so we can actually have fun using the real thing, the only one, to drive around for hopefully many years at TankFest and other shows.
Cool. Could you explain a little bit of the process of bringing this back into running order?
Well, basically the first thing we did was strip everything down. Let's start from the start. So stripping the engine bay down, taking the original engine out, taking the auxiliary engine out, basically stripping it down to a bare chassis. And then a lot of the parts we're going to salvage, or shall we say we have salvaged. So then everything was a massive process of cleaning each individual part. I mean, every nut and bolt has been polished, or if it was too badly damaged, we'd actually order a genuine copy of a new version. But even like down to all the grease nipples, we've polished them all up. So we've done like every single thing that we have touched has been clean, polished, and then put back together. We have cheated a little bit. We've fitted a replacement Recon engine in it just because of the time scale, really. So we've done that. We also did the same with the gearbox. We wanted to make sure that it was asbestos free. So the brake linings went away and was changed for the modern equivalent. So again, we know the brakes are safe and we know they're going to be all right. So we've tried to make improvements, but keeping the vehicle period, and but we're adding some more reliable things in.
So could you explain a bit of what is and what isn't original on the vehicle as at this moment?
The vehicle itself, most parts of it original track, original engine, all the stuff that should be in a Mark III Centurion. The turret itself, we don't actually have the original traverse mechanism. That somehow was removed from the turret years ago. But a lot of the elevation system is still in it, and we have enough to remanufacture one of the two parts that are missing. So we shall have it elevating, going up and down, hopefully on the original controls. Now, the traverse, people ask a lot, is it going to traverse? We need it to traverse for a lot of reasons, for safety, for access to get the engine base to do repairs and maintenance, and plus it would be quite cool to set up a display when it's not driving around. So I don't actually have the original traverse box, or shall I say we, the Tank Museum, we don't have that, but I am going to try and fit a standard Centurion traverse gear into it. So it will do the exact same job, and because we won't be essentially firing a real round, it will be safe enough and do the job. So fingers crossed I can make that work. So yes, it will elevate and it will traverse.
So could you explain some of the biggest challenges you faced with this project?
Timescales is the biggest challenge we've faced, and it's things like getting certain parts and parts ready for certain times. So it's not just a case of, I can just put the engine in whenever or whatever. Everything has to be done at a certain time. And like now, we'd love to put the gun in, but we can't fit the gun until the fuel tank's fitted. But really, we wanted to do a load of stuff before we fitted the turret. But we're constantly battling with this time scale of we have to make progress every time we can. But as far as the actual vehicle, the hardest things for us is like repairing the original bin boxes. So that's something that just takes a hell of a lot of time. There's no quick and easy way around it, quite tedious. And obviously, when we needle gunned quite a lot of the vehicle, which anyone that's needle gunned, like we said before, takes an incredible amount of time. So they're the main things.
So how does it feel to be able to work on such a unique vehicle?
I suppose like, a lot of the time I don't actually think about it, but then it's like when you guys have turned up and you actually realise how cool it actually is. But I suppose off camera, it's quite normal to us because this is something we're doing all the time regularly. But yeah, to see everyone's reaction when we do so and reading through the comments and seeing what everyone says, you start to realise actually this is quite a cool thing to be doing. And yeah, sometimes you forget we forget how lucky we are to be involved in something like this. That said though, it is a lot of work. You know, it's not easy and there's quite a lot of stress, but we're pretty happy. It's pretty cool doing it.
What does it feel like to be able to work and collaborate with the Tank Museum and like companies like World of Tanks?
It feels a little bit surreal because I just feel like I'm just a normal farmer's kid that now all of a sudden we're restoring tanks and working with you guys. It seems quite strange that we're literally working with one of the biggest tank game in the world, restoring a real vehicle, which is, the only one in the world. So we're doing a lot of things there, which is very weird for someone like myself that I never thought that would ever happen. And then here we are, randomly in an old farm shed building this thing. So yeah, it's quite, it just feels, it's a surreal experience. It doesn't really feel real what we're doing. I think when it's finally actually at Tank Fest, it's going to be like we actually did this. I think it's going to be, at the minute, where it's incomplete, although it's getting there. I think when the turret's on and the gun crush on, it's going to, every step we go, it's just getting a little more cooler each part of the process now. It's getting to the cool stage where it's nearly finished.
How does it feel knowing that you're going to be the first person to drive this on display at Tank Fest 2024?
I think it's going to be quite weird, quite surreal, but it's going to be a massive thing for me. I mean, driving them, they all drive the same. So if you've driven one Centurion, you've driven them all, and like they're a good vehicle to drive anyway. But yeah, this is definitely going to be the coolest one you could ever think about driving. And actually, I think it's going to be one of the fastest as well, because the turret and all the things, I think, adds another 12 or 13 tons. So it'll be about 42 tons. And I think the Centurion Barv, for instance, that's 40 tons, and that's rapid. You know, the one I've got is quick. So this will be the fastest gun tank Centurion, I believe.
Is it much different with this project compared to other vehicles you've worked with? Because obviously, since you're working with us, we've got a lot of our archival material that I imagine you can't really get.
We never get access to that. So yeah, that's quite an unusual thing to be able to have access to all these things that we'd have never known about, and drawings like to literally remanufacture things like that. Without that, it would have been impossible. So yeah, and like working on something where there are no parts for it because it is a one-off, and there are, yes, you've got the turret and the gun, but there's so many other bits and pieces that make this unique. It's invaluable really that we can see how that was built and actually have the blueprints or access to them. It's quite incredible after all those years for a vehicle that they only made one of to still be any record of it at all.
So for those of our viewers who aren't that familiar with you, could you explain where they can find you?
Yeah, so you can find us on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube. We're all the same things, just Mr. Hughes. That's my title for everything. I have to keep it simple because we're simple folk. Yeah, that's where you can find us, and you'll see us messing around with stuff like this. And yeah, this is pretty much all we do. We do other things, but mainly tanks.
Fantastic. Well, is there anything else you would like to say, particularly to the people who have helped fund the project, the crowdfunders, World of Tanks?
Well, I mean, it goes without saying, none of it would be possible. I know we probably keep saying that, but it seems so bizarre that here we are actually building it. But again, without everyone at home and World of Tanks supporting us on this project, it literally wouldn't be possible. And it just seems such a strange experience to be here actually putting it together. But we just want to make sure that all your donations or whatever will be put to good use, and we hope that you'll be pleased with the end result and it'll be available for many years to come.
Well, thank you very much, Joe, and we all look forward to see you driving this around the arena at TankFest 2024.
Yeah, I'll look forward to it as well. Fingers crossed we don't have any breakdowns, but it is a tank, so who knows?
Whilst in the long run, the FV4005 and FV4005 projects didn't lead to any further development, it's been a brilliant opportunity for us to work with different military history enthusiasts and private collectors to restore this vehicle to its former glory.
Although FV4005 never had much in the way of historical significance, it's one of those unique vehicles that have gained fame and admiration from tank enthusiasts around the world, particularly from online gaming communities such as World of Tanks. Tanks such as TOG-2, M22 Locust, and even the Italian Carro Veloce have all found new devotees in younger audiences thanks to these online gaming communities. And who knows, there's always the possibility that one of these tanks might be restored in the future.
I really hope you enjoyed watching this tank chat, and if you did, please do consider subscribing. And if you were lucky enough to see FV4005 running at TankFest 2024, we'd love to hear your comments down below.